Все, коллеги, мы в эфире. Добрый день. Так, ну, мы в эфире. Всем здравствуйте. Я рад приветствовать всех на круглом столе или панельной дискуссии, которая посвящена финансам и устойчивому развитию. Меня зовут Grigorovich Иван, я генеральный директор компании РЖД Инвест.
On green finance and sustainable development. My name is Ivan Grigorovich. I'm the general director of IC Russian Railway Invest.
Алексей Miroshnichenko, заместитель председателя VEB.RF.
I'm happy to give you Alexey Miroshnichenko, deputy chairman, member of the board, VEB.RF, sitting by my side. And we also have Yan Tavrovsky, president of JP Morgan in Russia, connecting remotely, Kirill, Kondrashin, head of CIS Debt and Capital Markets, JP Morgan, Tatyana, Orlova, head of the Corporate Finance Department, Russian Railways, Marina, Chekurova,
Eduard
Expert Array, First Deputy General Director, Eduard. Dzhabarov, co-head of Debt Capital Markets and Managing Director of SBER CIB. And Andrey Solovyev from VEB Capital. So, the format of this panel discussion is as follows. Let us talk about the debt markets available to the Russian companies, discuss
вопрос. Меня слышно? Похоже, что нет. Zoom меня не слышит, да? Отлично, прекрасно. Тогда я запускаю... Включите, пожалуйста, презентацию Григоровича Ивана. На первом слайде основные тренды заимствований крупных компаний 18-19 и первое полугодие 2020 года. Видно, что достаточно существенная доля заимствований приходится на облигационные займы, меньшая часть на кредитные. Есть отдельные выпуски зеленых облигаций в этой доле. Например, у российских железных дорог, о которых мы немножко поговорим.
Green bonds,
на самом деле,
like the Russian Railways,
этот тренд
recently issued
будет усиливаться, по нашему мнению, но при этом
green bonds.
есть и проблемы, которые на этом рынке
trend will become stronger and stronger despite the challenges that still exist in this market, like the underdeveloped infrastructure and certain issues in project evaluation in terms of how green they are, and the lack of proper measures in the ESG markets, even though that the potential for this market in Russia is quite a strong one. So I would like to invite our colleagues from JP Morgan first. So my question to you, is the green investment market a mature and promising one? Ivan, I have prepared a short presentation for you. I will try to run through it as fast as I can. For the sake of time, I hope the slides are now on the screen. To answer your question, whether this market is mature and promising one, well, the answer is very simple. This market has matured a lot over the past few years. You can see that the volume of social and green bonds increased by a matter of 25 times, reaching $35 billion last year, and it's pretty close to achieving that target this year as well, despite the pandemic and such. More and more banks and companies are declaring their commitment to ESG principles, and they're very reluctant to finance companies which are polluting the environment and do not follow the ESG requirements. So just to give you an example, JP Morgan has stopped any financing to projects involved in drilling operations in the Arctic offshore. We are no longer offering any funding to coal mining companies. And this goes beyond the banking industry. So this is not just a temporary fashion. Well, the thing is that bank people are also people. We want to do the right thing, and plus there is a certain pressure from the community, from our clients who bring us deposits. They ask us not to finance companies which do not comply with the ESG requirements. Well, to issue green bonds, you need to find the right project which is involved, which will spend this money for the declared purpose, which falls into one of the green categories, like renewable energy, energy efficiency, preventing pollution, green transport, which is very close to us and very close to Russian railways. And like I can name such projects as financing Lastochka commute trains, and this is where green bonds come in very handy. So when you find such a project, the project is evaluated, they bring in the experts for a second opinion, and in the end, after the project, the company must disclose all the information on how this money has been used and whether the money has been used for the green purposes. So those companies which want to issue green bonds, and they face the challenge that the markets doesn't have too many investors, and the existing investors, they are quite limited in times, plus hydrocarbon intensive companies which can't really offer you a purely green project. Well, they struggle with accessing this growing pool of green money, of green investment. So they started seeking alternatives. The first alternative is the transition bonds, where the company says basically, okay, I have an investment project, I need some money. Like, for example, I will build a wastewater treatment facility on my production site. So this is the project, this is the design, this is the expert assessment. If you give me money, I will reduce the pollution to the environment. But my core business is far from being a green one. So this is what the transition bonds are about. We had 3 deals already. The most recent one was SNAM, a huge Italian company. Our friends in Italy made a step further. They developed a sustainability-linked bond. So they said, basically, okay, you just give us the money. Please don't ask us how we are going to spend this money. But what we can promise is that we will increase the share of renewable energy in our energy supply from 48 to 51%. And they issued those sustainability-linked bonds. And they said that, well, if we fail to achieve this target, we will pay you 2.5% more than we have to, than the coupon rate. So this is a strong motivation for them to transition to that. The green investors went mad about that, so they said that, okay, NL company is not a green one, they consume lots of coal, and who knows how they're going to spend our money. But they successfully issued that bond. This year they had another issue in pounds, promising to increase the share of renewable energy to 55%. Otherwise, they would have to pay 2.5% on top of the coupon rate. So I think that this is the overall movement in the market. And I want to commend Russian Railways for having so many projects that are eligible for financing through green bonds, and there are other companies who want to do the right thing from the environment, and they are there in the market. Okay, I will have to skip some of the slides. Page 5 is just the description of all the various types of borrowers we have in the market, the companies which issue green bonds in transportation. For example, okay, I can't switch slides, but do believe me, in transport, Russian Railways is one of the most prominent green bond issues. SNCF in France, New York City Subway, and some other companies, including Visa, PepsiCo, Apple. Well, I can continue on and on and on. More and more companies are coming to the green bond market. And now I would like to hand over to Kirill Kondrashin, who will tell you about the green bond issue by Russian Railways. We have Kirill Kondrashin with us here on the Zoom call, and he can tell you about the feedback from the green investors towards the green bonds issued by Russian Railways. Well, thank you. Russian Railways is so far the only Russian company to issue green bonds in the international markets. There was a euro-nominated issue in 2019. This year we had a Swiss franc nominated issue. The bonds found a lot of interest among international investors, including green investors. They also attracted new investors to Russian Railways, those companies which had not invested in Russian Railways before. So the green part of May 2019 issue improved the placement price for Russian Railways, whereas for more volatile markets, like the one that we had in March, there the green parts of the issue improves the overall price and helps the company with the placement, because otherwise the company may have had difficulties with that. Okay, thank you, Kirill, and thank you, Jan. And now let us move to Russia. I have a question to Alexey. Alexey Miroshnichenko. What are the risks that companies may face in the Russian market? What is the approach to project assessment in Russia? I want to thank you, Ivan, for the question. Okay, I will skip the part about the international market because there's really nothing you can add to what JP Morgan have said. I will talk about Russia. What are the barriers to green financing in Russia? A company to be as successful as Russian railways has to meet a few criteria, like being as big as Russian railway. Number two, it must have a green project which complies with the requirements set by the green investment community. And number three, it should be free from any sanctions in terms of financing. And there are not so many companies like that in Russia today. If you look at smaller scale projects, where they individually cannot compete for the attention of green investors because it would be too expensive and cumbersome for them to pass through the qualification, we think that there must be a standard in place which will harmonize all the international standards and give a clear definition for green investors, for green investment. So we have attentively studied all the available investment standards in different markets. We lended them to the Russian legislative system, and now we have a taxonomy of green projects. We have already published the consultative draft on our website in July this year. And we have already started receiving feedback from the investors community, feedback to this document, which is based on ICMA, climate bonds, IDFC, Chinese standard, and the taxonomy technical report. So now we will incorporate the feedback we have received from the community at the quantitative requirements and establish the cutoff threshold. The key areas are the same as in the international taxonomy. We have not invented anything new here. And during the issue by Russian railways, we tested this taxonomy. We verified it by expert array agency. And we see that about 1/3 of our deal portfolio do comply with the green investment requirements. It's just that the size is too small, perhaps. But we in VEB.RF are happy to help those companies in developing a portfolio of projects to issue green bonds in the markets, and we can guarantee that all the deals in that portfolio will comply with the green investment requirements. Plus, there is now an initiative to set up an interagency coordination group which will study the topic of governmental support to green investors and green projects. Because in practice, our number one goal is to find and highlight the projects and the companies like Russian railways, which comply with all the green investment requirements and which may be interesting to the green investors, especially those which are focusing on ESG investment. Next, we can focus on green construction, because you can build a building using just conventional standards, or you can build a house which would comply with the most state-of-the-art energy efficiency and environmental standards with the maximum energy efficiency, with the maximum energy conservation. This construction is more expensive, but it will cost much less to operate this building in the future. We are now mulling the opportunity of developing some additional support measures to companies involved in green construction to close this gap which exists there. So green financing will, on the one hand, help Russian companies to attract foreign ESG investors, and on the other hand, it will help those projects which may lack some of the capex and they need to raise additional money to implement their projects at the required scale and level to take those projects to a totally new quality bar, to promote the ESG principles, so that in 20 years after today our cities are not packed with gas-guzzling cars, the country is not covered with oil pipelines, that in 2020 Russia is a sustainable and environmentally responsible country. Thank you, Alexey. I have a question to Tatyana Orlova. So you have successfully had several issues, so is there enough projects to compete for ESG investment, and could you give any tips to those companies who want to do that?
Well, thank you for your question. Perhaps I would like to give the floor now to Andrey Solovyev, because he has a conflicting meeting right now. So perhaps I will take the microphone after him and then probably ask him first to go. My question to you, Andrey, is for European banks, Russian ones working in Europe, is this green element enough, and would the Russian banks have enough money to buy both green and green assets, and which would support the activity of Russian bonds? So, do you think that green tag is enough for you to be interested in the bonds? First of all, I would like to thank Tatyana. Usually I was taught to let ladies go first. Now I take the floor. Now, first, international practice. You have my slide so that you can see that. I'll share the view of J.P. Morgan, and of course, second one. And in principle, green bonds is not something new. It's just they have been geometrically rising of late. 3 years ago, we did a lot for the Chinese energy companies, but now China is really behind Europe. Europe is ahead, and Canada and the US are behind. About 15% of the European assets of European funds are about green bonds. By 2023, it would be about half of the portfolio. Half of the assets would be related or focused on green bonds, or as they now say, they would be focused on environmental instruments. In the left column, you see the projects, and of course Russian Railways is a pioneer in this sense, not only for Russia but for Eastern Europe as well. But in addition to green bonds, you have social bonds and KPI bonds. Jan Tavrovsky mentioned that shortly. Novartis did this, and NL did this. And frankly speaking, when Novartis and NL managed to cut cost by 12 pips, and unless they would actually stick to their commitment, there would be a 25 pips increase in the coupon. Investors were quite active in the placement, so it was actually sold. For green bonds and social bonds, we have the Californian companies quite active. So Alphabet, which is part of Google, they managed to float both. Among the sovereign bonds, so we have Germany as the pioneer, 6.5 billion this year, which is 1 basis point below its curve, because in addition to that huge volume of 6.5 million in green and social bonds, it also floated 25 billion other bonds. This is the future, whether we want it or not want it. Like a few years back, we didn't have any iPhones, now we have them. And the same would happen with the bonds, and I don't think that Russia would be behind that, or should be behind that. The EU is very active in social bonds. They placed 17 billion social bonds, and they exceeded the initial order by 4 times, and we should really remember that. In Russia, of course, it looks like exotics, but this is something that we are coming to, and that all people are coming to, because half of the European funds are going to invest only in green paper, and this is going to happen already in 3 years. The EU is going to issue more in Q4, and you saw some surge in Q3, but in Q4 they promise to issue as much. We are saying that it is geometrical growth in the number of bonds issued. And I should note here, it's important to think that how this product can be developed actively in the Russian Federation. 2 ways there. The first way is to reduce the tax burden for the investors in green bonds, and the tax rate should really be cut 2 times, as an example. And the second way is that major funds should take part of their assets and put them into green bonds. Of course, it should be like a first push for that movement, and we don't think that this should carry some tax privileges for the issuers, but there should be investor privileges. That's what actually I have to say in brief. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go back to Tatyana now. And please share your experience of your company that you have accumulated, and what else can we expect from you. Thank you. Can you please put up my presentation? Indeed, Russian Railways is a pioneer today in the area of green financing, and although Russian Railways is one of the most environmentally safe and friendly, we still had to do some work to receive the certifications that we have today. Next slide, please. Russian Railways is now certified by both international agencies and by local agencies, and primarily by VEB.RF. And the Russian market is developing into the environmentally safe financing, but we're only making first steps. However, there is a lot of interest to that. In September, we issued another tranche of our bonds and also certified it under international standards. We received the ratings from expert RA rating agency, and also received international certification. And I should say that many of the investors invested because the paper was green. So there is demand, but we also need to probably think about more liberal regulation. And the Russian standards, you cannot issue green bonds and spend those for refinancing purposes. Internationally, it is possible. You have 3 issues of green bonds issued by Russian railways, and international and local ones, and partially money from those issues were spent for refinancing. And I think that this is again the policy that would help boost the number of transactions and resolve the problem that we are facing, and that was discussed by VEB experts, because some projects are not enough, do not carry enough incentives to go into our market. So one of the incentives could be that this money can be used for refinancing. Russian railways and many other companies have been investing in green projects for quite some time, and Russian railways adopted an environmental strategy right after Russian railways were incorporated as a legal entity, and our investments in this area are permanent. And in this sense, refinancing and the possibility of asset management, these could be a great support to other companies and borrowers to do the same and to have the same issues. Going back, Ivan, to your question, I should say that whether we're going to have enough green projects, yes, we will have such projects, both green and social projects, and we are preparing a list of such projects in line with international requirements. The key bottlenecks here are anything which is related to the development of methodology, which would help demonstrate to the external users the fact that such projects are in line with the green requirements of the investor country. That's probably the main difficulty there, and we also talked about the targeted use of this money available on our website. We also made disclosures about the green projects, and we will continue to do so. And hopefully in some time we're going to also issue a global report about ESG based mobilization of investment. My next question would go to Maria Chekurova, and what we need to remember, what are rather Russian investors or issuers need to remember who would like to place their bonds in a green manner. So what would be unique about that, or peculiar about that, whether international standards of the kind can be directly transplanted into the Russian reality, please. Marina, we cannot hear you. Can you hear me now? Because I have some parallel sound going. Now you can hear me. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, colleagues. I was very much interested in the presentations by my colleagues before me, and indeed you touch upon some questions which are important for me. Please show slide number 3 from my presentation, and the principles that were put into the materials of the World Bank in particular, and the taxonomy that we have there. We think that they're quite applicable locally, because Alexey said that we actually reworked those documents and took into account everything that is put there, so that those documents and standards can be more applied in Russia. Perhaps we're below the level, I mean environmentally speaking, the level so that we would be 100% in compliance with the European levels and the requirements and those of the World Bank. Now, next now, I have like an insert, a little box there, which says that what we are looking at and what would be nice to have for an issuer when the issuer comes into the market. This is required not only for your dealings with the rating agency, but also for your partners, so that you can prove that you are green. This is an environmental report and or environmental compliance report, so in a nice document which is nicely written, which provides good criteria and clear criteria about what is considered green or not. So then internal corporate papers, important to have them, or at least have them in mind. I mean, you don't need to go into too many details, especially for a medium-sized company. However, you need also to outline the criteria of what you consider to be green in terms of your issue. You also need to have some regulations about collective decision-making bodies that would take decisions about the green characteristics of a project. And yes, indeed, we saw the project and thought that it is green. Also regulations about the future use of the money collected, how the use of this money is monitored, and of course disclosure policy. How often do you disclose information about the use of this green money? We have a table there, which we see that we'll look at the selection of the projects. So we never mentioned anything about green loans. Another possible good area of thinking, and unfortunately our banks have no such concepts. Only one bank has that's understanding of a green loan. So again, to think where this money goes and how this money is invested. And these are the things important for the investor. Regarding the investor side, of course, investors have to read carefully the issued documents, the investment presentation of a company when it is going out into the market and launches paper, and also follow information about future operations. Our company also decided quite clearly that working with green bonds, we not only kind of like rate those bonds once, but rather we monitor them once a year, either to confirm the status or not. And I think, and we think that this is the right approach. Regarding smaller companies, you know that a relatively small company in Khanty-Mansiysk autonomous region, this is the Khanty-Mansiysk resource supplier, issued green bonds once, and of course in terms of volume you don't need to have them at like 500 million rubles. Of course there's a scale-up effect, but still we have people coming to us to consult and to discuss such an idea, including we have some smaller companies coming our way. Regarding investor support, it was correctly mentioned that here we need to incentivize investors from the point of view of taxation in relation to the money invested, such. But for issuers, this is quite a costly affair, because you need to really come up with a lot of documents, environmental compliance reports and various expert examinations, etc. So if the development of such green instruments would be assisted, then it would be good to have also some auditors' opinions about the green bonds, and so that such opinions and other documentation can be subsidized. Well, the Russian railways can afford such costs, and of course it was to the benefit of its pricing policy. But if you take smaller companies, too many of such companies, this would be an entry barrier to the market. And of course we welcome some green commitments and obligations. This could be bonds or other more aggregate and complex instruments.
Да.
That's probably all I wanted to share with you today. The question is more or less transiting to Eduard Dzhabarov about the actions to be taken in the Russian market to develop this green financing market in the country. What do you think can be done by the government and by the financial institutions for that market to be growing in Russia? Thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon. And indeed, I would join to what has been said by JP Morgan and VTB. But just to add some words about demand promotion. We have a pipeline of companies who are ready to issue green bonds. We have the appropriate projects there, but the stumbling block there is the cost of mobilization of investment. If that cost wouldn't be no different from any regular corporate borrowing, then most of the CFOs and managers do not understand why they need to really spend time and effort on such green bonds if the economics of the issuance is almost zero to them. And we understand that the demand on the part of the issuers is quite obvious and the interest is quite clear. We would concentrate on the demand, and the demand is supported by two clusters: banks, for the most part, and the so-called institutional investors, such as pension funds, management companies, and social insurance companies and management companies. And our proposals are more or less at the overlapping point of the interests of the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank as the regulator that can help credit institutions as part of the possible initiative to provide concessional reporting standards. This could be also a zero-in rate for the coupon compared to the regular bonds of savings bonds, for example. And we can use another rate based on the capital gains from such green bonds. Again, perhaps compared to the stocks of high-tech companies. In Moscow Exchange, we have special sections with a number of such issues, but the list of those issues is not that long. The third one is creating specialized funds investing in green bonds. This can be done at the basis of development institutions like VEB to create this primary demand for such. Also, we can provide some regulatory easing to those, making them equal to subsidized public bonds. This would at least help refer such bonds to the second category with a risk rating of 20%, and also put some bonds to the category of low risk. Well, such bonds can indeed, with appropriate credit rating, may be referred to the low risk categories so that banks can calculate the risk values. Another policy would be to have the same attitude to such bonds as to the other instruments of project financing. And we think that making bonds, green bonds, equal to project financing mechanisms and instruments would actually stimulate the demand for that.
And such a simple measure as including green bonds into the collateral for 1 month, into the collateral pool for 1 month and 1 year. Well, this is a temporary measure, and the market can change. And when we are in the situation of liquidity crisis, this measure may be quite useful in the market. So I have just listed the carrot type measures to attract investors, plus there's also a stick to introduce additional supervision measures over those institutional investors which invest into green bonds, which means that we would oblige institutional investors to hold part of their investment in green instruments. Well, we have to take into account the amount of such instruments available in the Russian market. Russian Railways has not issued so many green bonds. Well, I have to say that we see a lot of interest of issuers towards green bonds, but we need to have a very tight standard to these markets to avoid any greenwashing, as Tatyana has mentioned. Otherwise, they would claim any bond as a green one, and we would have a huge market of the so-called green bonds. So the regulator must set clear parameters and define who is the ultimate decision-making authority to classify this issue as green. Marina Chekurova has also mentioned that rating agencies must supervise the implementation of green projects financed by green bonds. Well, this is a topic for discussion, because if a rating agency thinks that the company no longer fulfills its commitments under the green project, a green bond, would the holder of this bond be qualified to claim the payment prematurely? But otherwise, we welcome this initiative. We think that banks should become the most active player in the green bond market, because some of the companies which cannot access this market could raise funding through green loans, and the banks would issue green bonds, and this money would be directed to financing small and medium-sized enterprises involved in green projects. Thank you.
Плановое время, скажем так, выступления, и все дали высказаться. Если есть какие-то комментарии от коллег-участников,
I think that everybody has had their say. If you want to add some additional comments, you can do this now.
Можем, ну не то что подвести итог, а в финале нашей
дискуссии
планировалось проведение голосования. Оно должно быть доступно всем участникам, которые смотрели нашу панельную дискуссию. Вопрос, если можно его вывести на экран, и варианты ответов.
This is a multiple choice question.
Коллеги, что у нас с опросом? Ну, давайте я тогда проведу его среди участников дискуссии в режиме вопрос-ответ. Как вы считаете, верное финансирование это? И варианты ответа, которые предложены для голосования. Пункт А – это новая реальность, в которой уже работают и заемщики, и инвесторы. Б – это новая тема, хайп, которая сойдет на нет. И В – это узкий сегмент финансового рынка, ну, которому, если в российских реалиях там отнести, например, халяльные инвестиции. Что, по вашему мнению, это на сегодняся день? Чекурова, Марина,
what do you think is the best description for green investment today? Well, I would put C, but I think that it has all the potential to move to A. Well, I think it's an A, the new reality, because we see a lot of movement towards that in the lending market and in the investment market. We see a growing part of investors who claim that they're doing only green investment. JP Morgan have already refused to finance non-green businesses which do not comply with the ESG requirements. So we think that we are already living the new reality now. Edward. I agree with Tatyana. It's a... Dear colleagues from JP Morgan, what's your opinion? Well, how can I argue with Tatyana? It's an A. It's definitely A. Well, it's both A and half of B. Yes, it's the new reality, and it's the hype topic. Kirill, well, it's the fashionable topic. It's a hype, and it's the new reality now. I think it's both C and A. I think it's a wider new reality. Because green topic, green investment is no longer an option. It's becoming the foundation for any capital mobilization. Alexey, well, I think that this is the incoming reality. We are not there yet, but we'll be definitely there in a matter of few years. My dear colleagues, I would like to thank all our panelists. I want to thank our online audience for watching our session. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next year, maybe during the new reality, maybe offline, and this is where we will be happy to catch up with what will have been going on with you. Thank you.